What is good, my ex-homies? It's your boy Jacob Gooden, and we're back for the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. I'm so stoked today. I'm talking with Liliana, and she's a new homeschool friend. And we got connected via social media, I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I saw your video with Unreligiously.
Okay, that's right. That's right. Yeah, and you reached out and you were like, "I've got a story I want to share," and those
Yeah.
are always the best. So, you know, this is encouragement for anybody who is thinking about, hey, maybe I should reach out, maybe not. Do it because it can lead to this. It can lead to an interview on the show. And so, Liliana, thank you for coming on the show. I'm very pumped to.
Hello.
I'm very pumped to share your homeschool experience with the audience. So, why don't you just take us through it a little bit? Tell us a little bit about your homeschool experience, kind of maybe where you grew up, siblings, the environment, curriculum, that kind of a thing. Walk us through your experience a little bit.
Sure. I was the second of four kids that were all homeschooled through high school. I grew up in South Florida. Um, Faith was very much intermingled with my homeschool experience. My parents were like Bible study leaders for most of my childhood. Um, So a lot of my stuff was done at home, but I did also have homeschool groups or classes, especially when I got to high school. I did do a little bit of dual enrollment. Um, very sheltered. My parents are very introverted, and I'm not, so I did not get nearly the social life I wanted, but I did interact with a variety of people growing up. So yeah, that's kind of how it was for me.
And roughly, I don't want to dox ages, but like around what time frame are we talking? Like
Oh,
homeschool?
I'm
Are you a
sorry.
product of
Yeah.
the '80s, the '90s, the 2010s?
I'm a 90s baby,
Okay.
so most of my recollection is from the early 2000s. I graduated in 2012.
Okay, very close. Yeah, I was in 2014, so we're not very far off there. Um,
Hey.
so so we kind of grew up in the same era of homeschooling, where I feel like
Mhm.
for me, it's funny because I have friends and I've had people come on the show who talk about like the fear of like, the truancy officer is going to come knocking on the door and
Yeah,
drag you
yeah,
away
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
a thing. But I feel like by like the 2000s and the 2010s, it was a little more normalized where maybe there wasn't totally that fear. Did you experience that at all, or like or were you like, this is semi-normal what we're doing here?
So I do remember as probably elementary age, we would go to the grocery store in the middle of the day on a weekday, and my mom would always be like, "Well, if someone asks, just tell them it's a teacher's work day because it's always a teacher's work day for me." So there was a little bit of that when I was younger, but by the time I was in middle or high school, I think South Florida in particular was very pro homeschooling, so I didn't feel that weird about it. I mean, I was aware most kids around me were public schooled, but I was just like, oh, I'm so unique and special because I'm not in public school like these people. So
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt too. I remember, especially when I got my driver's license. Then my mom started sending me to do the grocery shopping, right? And so I would be at the store. I was a kid who loved doing school later in the afternoon and in the evening and stuff like
mhm.
that. And so then I really got the day free, which is great in theory, but in practice it's a little bit rougher because, as a 16-year-old just at the grocery store, um, you know, you start to get those weird looks from people that are like, what is a 16-year-old
Yeah.
doing here? Shouldn't he be in school? Um, Kind of a thing, but yeah, and I would always just tell people I'm homeschooled or I go to private school or same deal. I just be like it's a teacher's day or whatever it was. Um,
Yeah.
so let's talk a little bit about like a school day for you and like what that looked like. Some homeschool parents super rigorous. There's a formula, there's a pattern to everything. You have like very strict schedules, but like other people it's very loosey goosey. So like what did you fall into either of those categories? Were you somewhere in the middle with it? Like what did a typical day of schoolwork look like?
Definitely when I was earlier childhood, like my parents overall are pretty strict and anal about things. So I do remember my mom had a typed up schedule on the side of the fridge, like you do this subject at this time, this subject at that time. I think there was a break for lunch and then, you know, a recess of sorts to go play outside. Didn't have a smartphone until I was 17, so I could actually play outside. And I think as I got more into like middle and high school, like I said, I was part of these like homeschool groups and classes. So I would go to class once a week for the whole day, get my homework for the entire week, and then throughout the week. I'm sure my mom had some kind of schedule, but it was just more or less like, okay, work on your homework. She would check it and everything like that. I don't remember as strict of a schedule by the time I got to high school. She's probably like sick of it after getting my older sister all the way through school before me.
Yeah. I feel like too as we got older, not every kid is this way, but like especially if you've been homeschooled for the majority of your time, you pick up the routine after a period, and then by
Yeah.
the time you're in those
Mm-hmm.
high school years, it's like you kind of know. Like I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna eat breakfast, then I'm gonna do math, then I'm gonna do science, then I'm gonna do read this, then I'm gonna, X, Y, Z, right? Like you kind of know the pattern, and maybe that's not everybody, but like I feel like so many of us kind of got to a point where mom and dad could maybe be a little bit more hands off with like a
Yeah,
just
for
a
sure.
checking in on like, hey, did you get everything done this week?
Mm-hmm.
Type of thing. Let's talk about these homeschool co-ops that you were a part of because I think
Okay.
it's something that like everybody's is a little different, but I think there is some similarities between them. I've talked a lot on the show about being part of Group Solutions, which was a co-op that met every 2 weeks. It was really structured. Like we
Oh,
had
okay.
we had 3 class periods and a lunchtime in there, and it was an opportunity, very much like you were talking about, where like we took um, like it could be a science class and a English class and maybe some kind of fun activities class or something like that. And then we got a recess lunchtime period where we got to hang out with all the other kids. But it was like structured a little bit more like a traditional school. And so like classes had age ranges on them, and we would sit in a lecture hall with maybe 20 other kids, and do stuff. But I know that not all co-ops work that way because I also was part of co-ops that were like 3 or 4 families and we would just like go hang out at somebody's house kind of a deal. um and so what did co-ops like look for you? You were saying it was like a once a week kind of a thing, and it seemed like it was something that had significant like this is where I was getting my homework for the next week kind of a thing. But what did like a typical co-op day look like for you?
Well, I was part of two different co-ops. So the one that I was in when I was younger, about I don't know, middle school age, it met at a Baptist church once a week, and different homeschool parents would teach different classes. So you would kind of go to different rooms inside this Baptist church and learn different things. I had my little friends that would do stuff with me. They made us do presidential physical fitness. I hated it so much. I pretended I was getting chased by the Nazgul to get my scores up, and what ended up happening was I looked back and saw my older sister, and I screamed and ran across the finish line in front of the homeschool parents. Are probably like, "Is she okay?" Because in my mind, she was the Nazgul to get me to go faster. But anyway, so yeah, so it was definitely more informal, and it had a lot of different teachers for different subjects or whatever. And then when I was in high school, I joined this program called Classical Conversations. So they met once a week at a different church, and one homeschool mom would teach like all the classes for certain age ranges. So I was kind of like part of the guinea pig class because they had just started, and so she would teach us like a few different classes. We'd have a lunch break, and then we'd come in and do like a few more classes once a week, and then she would give us like projects and homework to do at home the rest of the week.
Okay, yeah. Classical conversations is something I didn't do it personally. My cousins did, and then there's been a number of people on the show who've gone through it. But yeah, it's like
Oh,
a
really?
lot
Okay.
more.
Oh,
It is a lot more like you're saying. Like it's a structured. There is like a curriculum
yeah.
to it, and like I know people talk about like every year or every couple of years it kind of changes there's always like a main focus of everything, um and then and but yeah, you go in and there's like homework and a class setting and all those types of things. And so I think a lot of people will relate to you. I still, it's funny because people always are like, yeah, classical conversations. I'm like, I don't know what a day inside of classical conversations looks like, but but uh but I definitely know the term now. So yeah. Um I was gonna ask you too, because you said you were one of 4 kids, and so
Yeah.
did all of you guys do homeschool all the way through, or was there some transition periods in there? What did that look like?
I mean, my older sister's 5 years older than me, so I'm not 100% sure what happened before I arrived on scene and stopped her from being a spoiled single child. But as far as I know, she was homeschooled the whole way through. I definitely was. My younger sister was. my youngest brother, my understanding is that he not only graduated high school homeschooled, but he's also dual enrolling the whole time. So I think he graduated with like an associate's degree. So he's obviously smarter than me. I did some dual enrollment and not that much. So yeah, as far as I'm aware, we all got homeschooled through high school, and then they all went to college after that.
Well, let's talk about like I guess that transition period into adulthood, college, launching, right? And
Mm-hmm.
getting into the real world. Like
Yeah.
what did that look like for you? Because I think that, you know, a lot of there used to be a very strong stigma of like homeschool kids couldn't get into college. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
the messaging when I was being homeschooled was like homeschool kids are actually better in college because like we're smarter, we're like, you know, we're
Mm-hmm.
God's gift to the earth, basically. Um, and so, what college doesn't want you? Like, if you want to go to Harvard, you definitely can go to Harvard. Not the case. I was a very average student, um, but but you know, but a lot of my friends, we did end up going to college, and that was like our launch out period. But I also had a lot of friends who they were just like not really ready for college, and so stuck around,
Mm-hmm.
got jobs, that kind of a thing. And then I have friends that now I'm learning they also just weren't encouraged to go to college. So let's
Yeah.
talk about for you like launching into the real world and like you were saying like your brother did dual enrollment, you did a little bit of dual enrollment, but like what did college and like just getting out and being an adult look like for you?
So I was very heavily sheltered even through high school. So I would say my introduction to the real world began when I was 17, and I took just like a couple classes at a local community college, and it's like, what? You party every weekend? What? You're not a Christian? Whoa! It like freaked me out inside, but I still tried to like make friends and stuff like that. But it was definitely a huge culture shock for me starting at 17. Um, I felt like all of my siblings were encouraged in one specific area that they should study in college by my parents, but I feel like my role in the family, they just kind of looked down on me and acted like I wasn't as smart as my siblings. So I definitely did not feel encouraged to get to college. And of course, as a high school senior, you're just like, I'm sick of school. I don't want to go do more school.
Right.
So I just didn't end up going to college. They didn't really make me feel like I was smart enough to pursue any particular area. And even now as an adult, I'm just like, if I had to pick a major, I don't know why I would pick. So like, I know at this point it's definitely at least partially my responsibility, but I kind of feel like they failed me a little bit because they didn't like push that a little harder. Like, hey, you are smart enough, go learn something, while you still can. Because now it's much harder as an adult to try to get classes and stuff like that.
That's a good point you make of like that feeling of like whether it's like not necessary or like not smart enough to go do it. It's like that's like
Mm-hmm.
I mean that's dumb to some extent because like yeah, anybody you can learn anything if you really want to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And especially like we were talking about earlier with like kind of being able to eventually take on more of those roles of like being your own educator to some degree, like I
Yeah, for
think
sure.
it benefits I don't know, for my college experience it benefited me a lot because I knew how to structure a little bit of like my this is how I study, this is I need to understand this in this way. Like I knew how to get
Uh-huh.
to mastering something, I guess you could say. And so that played
Yeah.
well in college. But I also understand the point that sometimes people make of like college is not for everybody. And so like
Yeah.
that is also, a valid argument that some people go is like, is this student really into it? Like you were saying in high school, like the last thing I wanted to do was 4 more years of school. Like I was done as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah.
um so instead of college, you kind of just entered into the real world then. So were you looking jobs, career? Were you just like, I just need to get out of this house? Like what became the thing instead of college at that point?
I also wanted to say earlier, I was not aware of any like homeschool bias towards or against college as the homeschoolers. I just was like, well, yeah, most people are going to college, duh. Like, it doesn't matter if it's homeschool
Right.
or not. So
Right.
just want to throw that in there. Yeah, for me, it was like my main goal in life was just to leave my parents' house. I hated how they treated me since I was very young. I didn't want people bossing me around. So my main goal in life was just, I want to get out of here. And I realized as an adult, I needed a job to get out of here. So my first goal was childcare because I grew up like volunteering and working a lot with kids. Obviously it's a very accessible thing as a young Christian woman to get into. And then after a while, I was like, I can't do this anymore. um, so I just kind of was like, I'm just gonna find whatever I can get and work as much as I can and just get out because that's all I really wanted to do at that point. And then my parents ended up kicking me out at 21, so I was terrified, but at the same time, I was like, thank God I don't have to deal with you anymore in my house. So yeah, it was just kind of like I still don't know like what a career I would want, and it just feels really overwhelming. I don't feel like I was really prepared for that in the real world, and it just feels like everybody else has like this amazing, fulfilling career, and I just couldn't figure it out. I guess so. That's another thing that makes me feel like I'm not very smart because I'm just like, why is everyone else figuring this out? I don't know. I just have a job because I need a job to make money.
Yeah. Which I mean, that's to be honest, like that, career's not everything. I think a lot of people talk about like,
Yeah.
yeah, having that dream career, having that, like I love my job and like
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but also like life is more than work. You know what I mean? Like life
Mm-hmm.
there's so many
Yeah.
other things that make life very valuable and I think that's a culture thing I think in general where
Mm-hmm.
we get taught a lot of times the like you should love what you do and like there's some truth. You should be able to tolerate what you do for sure and not work in an
Yeah.
abusive environment or things like that, but I think there is
Yeah.
this misconception that it's like you have to absolutely love everything that you do and it's like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes a job is just a job. Sometimes a job is just to pay the
Mm-hmm.
bills. And I'm curious around like the messaging for you too of like, I know growing up in the church a lot of times there is this there is the very standard like the man is the head and he's supposed to be the provider and
Uh-huh.
all these types of things
Yeah.
and it's a woman's job, she's going to be a mom and she's going to take care of the
Mhm.
kids and take care of a house and those kinds of things. And so was that you talked about wanting to get into childcare and right off the rip and then being like this is not for me. um
Yeah.
so was that also like in the back of your mind of like, well, my real goal in life is just to like get married and have kids?
I mean, I definitely felt the societal pressure for sure. I definitely grew up in circles where a lot of the women were very young and had a bunch of kids, and it definitely was like, oh, this is the ideal as a Christian woman that you should strive for. But even when I was like a kid, I just wasn't like that. It took me a long time to not think boys were stupid and weird, you know. It took me a while to be like, oh, actually, okay, there's this guy named Peter Parker. He's actually kind of cute, you know. And then I was like, okay, I like the idea of getting married now, but I still don't want kids. I definitely felt out of place at youth group because I was surrounded by all these like super skinny girls that were like, oh yeah, I'm just the perfect submissive Christian young woman, and I just felt like I was always like too loud and opinionated, you know. Or like you hear about the archetype, like the Virgin Mary, and you're just like, oh, she's so quiet and submissive and nice, and I'm just like, oh, I guess I'm a terrible Christian then because I don't think that's ever going to be me. And then I have heard about the apostles being called the sons of thunder, and I was like, that's more my style. That's me. Yeah, okay, I feel better now. So like, yeah, I definitely felt like, oh, I actually have opinions. Oh, I don't like the idea of some guy bossing me around forever. Maybe I'm a bad Christian. Like that's what I felt like going for sure.
That's so interesting because I feel like everybody is like their own person, right? And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what makes people beautiful, right? Is the fact that like we
Yeah.
have our own unique characteristics. You know, we're loud. You mentioned earlier you were an extrovert, somewhat stuck in a house with a
Yeah.
bunch of introverts. Um,
Oh yes.
I'm what's called an ambivert, so like I'm 50-50, but like
Okay.
my extroverted
Yeah.
side is like I could go somewhere and not engage with anybody, like just be like I could go sit in a
Mm-hmm.
coffee shop. It's a great example. I could go sit in a
Yeah.
coffee shop and get all the energy I need off of people from the extroverted side, and then I'll go lock myself away at home for 3 days or whatever, and be introverted, and so that's like that's my type of thing. But I grew up in a house with a mix of the introvert extrovert type of thing, and so my
Okay.
my sister is a huge extrovert and she needs people and like she
Yes.
would beg, especially when I got my license, because my mom and I are more introverted. She would beg. She would be like, Jacob, can you please like drive me to this person's house, drive me to this thing, like let's just go to the mall, kind of a thing. And um, so I'm curious, like with the extroverted thing, because one of the things homeschoolers, we get a bad rap for like the socialization aspect, which like but extroverts are naturally just out there. They just naturally, whether
Yeah.
it's you insert yourself into the conversation or whatever it is, like you a lot of times extroverts know how to like get in there. And so, as you were leaving home, I'm sure that extroverted side of you is maybe hopefully able to like thrive a little bit and like,
Hmm.
okay, now I'm out, I can go like talk to people, and we were talking about the culture shock thing. And so I'm interested
Hmm.
how maybe those two things worked together of like I'm an extrovert, so now I'm putting myself out there a little bit more. But also that culture shock is like coming in where you're like, okay, now like I'm hearing swear words or I'm learning like there's people who believe other things that from me. And so like let's talk a little bit about like that and just kind of like again, we're getting into the real world now. So like
Yeah.
how is it, how is your extrovert coming out finally? And also like how is that playing into like the culture shock of just being an adult outside of the homeschool bubble?
I mean, I definitely know what you mean. Volunteering as a high schooler, I would talk to parents and then I would just casually drop that I'm a homeschooler. And they're like, "What? You don't seem like a homeschooler." And I took it as a badge of honor. Like, yeah, I'm not like the other homeschoolers. I'm so much better. But I was definitely scandalized and freaked out by everything,
Hmm.
especially at 17, 18. But then I started like feeling empathy for these people. And it's like, well, I don't want to just endlessly judge everyone like my parents did. Like it was instilled in me. But after a while, I started taking the stick out of my butt. And I was like, you know what? These are real people. Like, I care about these people, even if they're doing stuff I don't agree with. So I started just, and a part of it was necessity because I just needed friends, like growing up in the church, it was always like, oh, your close friends must be Christians. And then any other friends you have, it's okay if they're not Christian, but they have to be like on the outer circle or whatever. But that never happened for me. The Christian mentors that I was supposed to have just never were there for me and didn't make an effort. So I was like, well, I need somebody to be my friend. So I started meeting people at my different jobs or whatever, or through boyfriends I had, and I was just like, you know what, this isn't so bad. Like right now, my best friends in the whole world are a gay man, a bi woman, and a pothead. And younger me would have been like, whoa.
Yeah.
But it's just how it happened. It's just like I have my nerdy interests, and that attracted a variety of people, and I was learning new things, and I was just like, you know what, this is really cool. I like having different perspectives in my life. So I think the more I was out on my own, the less I was freaked out by everything. And I was like, okay, I'm finding that people like me, that I can find friends, and it's okay if we don't agree on every little thing.
Yeah. I think for me it was so interesting because like I went to a Christian college and so there's kind of that built-in belief of like, oh well everyone here we're still in agreement, right? It
Mm-hmm.
felt
Yeah.
um like kind of like youth group extended into early
Mm-hmm.
adulthood to some degree. And then when I got out of college, I got, I got a real job, and and by a real job, I worked at a coffee shop and I managed a coffee shop. But one of the things that was really
Cool.
cool about that job was the fact that like I had decided, okay, I want to go back to church. I want to like, I want to give it another try. And that job was like, guess what, Jacob? You're gonna work the Sunday shift. So like church was just out of the question. And I was like, okay, whatever, not a big deal. But the people I worked with on Sundays, we decided that like we were gonna like just start hanging out. So we'd get off work. The great thing about coffee shop jobs is
Mm-hmm.
you get off at like 3 in the afternoon. So we would get off work and we'd go get lunch, or we worked in this cute little downtown area. We'd go get a beer. We'd hang
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
and we were all very different people. Like you were saying, like
Mm-hmm.
we believed very different things. We came from very different backgrounds. And so, but we were friends and we got to like know each other and respect each other and ask each other all of the dumb questions about like, well, why is it you believe this? Or why do you vote like that? Or why do you, how was this experience
Yeah.
growing up? And so, like, I think that part of like, that to me was like the bubble burst of like coming out of the homeschool environment where it was like,
Mm-hmm.
now I have worldly friends and that are not on
Yeah.
like you were talking about the rings of like I have my very close friends
Yeah.
who are these things and then I have the outer friends. Like these people were starting to creep more into that inner circle and I was like
Mm-hmm.
they're people and like I love them and I love hanging out with them and like doing stuff with them and they can expose you to more that you're like, oh, okay, like I vibe with this. Went to my first yoga class with
Yeah.
them,
For sure.
stuff like that. Like it was kind of that like, okay, cool, yeah, maybe I will watch Harry Potter because I wasn't allowed to do that as a
Right.
kid, and
Yeah. Same.
so along that vein, like, what were the things that, as you were getting that exposure and making those friends, like that came to you and were like, okay, hey, like maybe I will give this thing a try, or maybe I will like let the guard down a little bit of like I was protected as a kid, and like now I'm just gonna like I'm gonna I'm gonna sample this little thing, or I'm gonna check this out. You talked about having all the nerdy interests, those kind of
Yeah.
things. Sometimes those things are denied as kids, but like what were things that you were picking up and you were like, okay, like was it just like, hey, I'm gonna watch Harry Potter now, or what were like those things that you were like, I wasn't allowed to do this as a kid, so I'm gonna do it now.
Yeah, there was a variety of things. I don't remember what happened first or anything, but like just realizing that partying every weekend is not the worst thing somebody can be doing with their life, and that they'll probably like stop doing it eventually because it's exhausting, or like, oh, I can drink alcohol on a semi-regular basis and that doesn't make me a horrible person, or like, you
Right.
know what, weed is not that bad of a thing either, or yeah, let me get into Harry Potter after being told it was witchcraft for 20 years and stuff like that. Or hey, maybe I don't have to just blindly forgive my parents for everything and like have to be in contact with them just because, oh, they're family, you
Right.
know. It's just like slowly over time. It's nice having somebody kind of gently challenge what you've always thought and you don't think twice about it, you know. Or even now I'm starting to follow Facebook pages about that perhaps the whole very patriarchal system of the church is not necessarily biblical, and they're highlighting a lot of female leaders in the Bible and stuff. So that's still challenging my thinking now. And it's like, I always thought, oh, women are supposed to submit. Oh, women are supposed to shut up. And now I'm like, maybe not, though. So again, love that train of thought for sure.
Yeah. I think that's really cool because, and it goes to a couple different things that we've talked about too, of like, it's never too late to learn stuff. It's never too late to
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, encourage new thought or changing your mind or anything like that. And so like, I think that that's something that was not always afforded to a lot of us, of that idea of like
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to challenge the thing. It's okay to look at it from the opposite perspective sometimes, like
Mm-hmm.
I did a couple years of like speech and debate kind of stuff, and that I'm thankful that like I had a few of those moments where it was like I would pick the argument that was like not the correct argument. And even though I didn't believe it, I'm like, but if you understand how that argument gets made,
Mm-hmm.
then you can combat it a little bit more. This is the apologetics in me. This is the like
Yeah.
defending my
Mm-hmm.
faith side of things. But you can take that into anything, right? It's like understanding,
Yeah.
you know, you know, we you brought up weed. Like I grew up in California. When weed became legal, that was like a big deal. But I also grew up like next to a
Yeah.
pothead and stuff like that. Grew up always believing it was
Mm-hmm.
wrong. All those types of things. When I got to a point in my life where I was like, is it really wrong? What is it? How do I
Yeah.
understand this better? It just shifts your worldview a little bit, right? And it doesn't have to be
Mm-hmm.
like I'm not a big drugs person in general. Um, to each their own. But I definitely was like, I don't really care, where I used to be such a hard, like, that's such a bad thing, like you should never do
Mm-hmm.
that kind of a thing. And so, like you were saying about, I think that ability to shift your thinking or even just ask the question is like so freeing
Mm-hmm.
and so educational.
Yeah, I really feel like we as a country have lost that, and it's so sad because like I find so much joy in learning other people's perspectives on things. It really helps when you're just entrenched in one way of thinking. And it's so sad that I feel like a lot of people in the homeschool community don't even try to think outside of their little box.
Yeah. I want to pivot just a little bit, and I want to talk about, you know, you mentioned your homeschool experience was like maybe not the worst thing in the world, maybe not the best thing in the world. I'm curious where you stand today on like homeschooling as a thing. So like let's just hypothetically say you have a friend who has kids. They're coming to you and they're like, "We're thinking about homeschooling." And you did it, you lived it. Like what are you telling them? Are you for it, against it? How would you encourage them to explore the homeschool world?
I feel like it's good for very specific situations or very specific people. It is kind of concerning how just anyone can do it and you don't have to have any kind of qualifications. So
Hmm.
that is a little concerning as I think about it as an adult. I also feel like it's a it's like an all access pass to very controlling people like my parents, where no one's checking on the kids and they can literally do whatever they want, and that's also concerning. So I feel like if you are a healthy person with like some level of qualification that is willing to check in with external people and give your kids an actual social life, I think it can be a great option. Also, if your kid has like disabilities or just doesn't get along with other kids, it can help them just focus on learning instead of all the social dynamics that I'm sure public school has. Um, I feel like there probably are a bunch of kids who don't necessarily need to be homeschooled. Like, I'm always going to wonder, how would I have gone along in public school? Like, maybe I would have been well liked and had a lot less like self-esteem issues than I did as a homeschooler who's very isolated. I'll never know. So it's like, I feel like most people don't necessarily have to do it, but if you have the means and some education, I think it could be a great option.
I'm kind of in that same boat with you where I feel like it can be done really well and it can be a successful thing. We talked about like the ability to get in college and stuff like that. Like that is never, I don't know, at this point it's not totally a concern of mine. Like I used to really worry,
Mm-hmm.
and I think even my mom worried a lot when she was
Oh,
homeschooling us of like, is my kid gonna get into college, kind of a thing. But like, um, my parents, their goal was we want to make good humans who go out in the world and are able to do what they want to do, and that that's the mindset that you and I are kind of talking about of like having a healthy
yeah.
mindset of like the goal of this is not shelter my kids or protect them from there is a protection
Mm-hmm.
level, I guess, but like it is really like we want to do the best thing for our kid. And to your point about like a learning disability or like ADHD
Mm-hmm.
or like anything like that, it's like sometimes homeschooling can really benefit those types of people. But regardless, I'm of the opinion that like parents being advocates for their kids in any type of school environment is like
Mm-hmm.
ultimately going to pay off way bigger, because I think a big shift is coming in our education. This is my like tinfoil hat like predictions of the future kind of a moment, but like I think a big shift is coming in education, and I think that home education, public education, and private education is like it's due for a really big shift, and
Uh-huh.
I think it's coming really quickly. But that's a whole nother topic that we could spend like 4 hours
Oh,
debating and stuff like that. But
yeah. No, I
uh,
could totally see
something else I'm interested in kind of exploring with you maybe is the idea of like making a new family. You talked about, your parents
that.
not really supporting you going to college or making you feel less than, and you also talked about the high control aspects of your familial relationships. But you also talked about now having like your best friends and the people in your life that are like in a lot of ways like a chosen family, because
Uh-huh.
sometimes family doesn't work out, or sometimes like you live far from family like I do, and so like you need those people in your life who like become those solid influences, those solid people that
Uh-huh.
like shit hits the fan, right, and you can call up and say, hey, I need help. And so I'm curious if you have any like tips or anything around like finding that, because like as adults it's difficult to make friends, it's difficult to like
Yeah.
be out there and to find those people. And so I don't know, is there anything in that vein that
I mean, yeah, it's definitely difficult. I guess just be open to random meetings. One of my best friends, I met him because we were working the same job, and I guess I mentioned something about Lord of the Rings, and that's all it took. And he was like, "All right, you're my new best friend." My other friend, I was taking stuff out of my car trunk at my apartment complex, and he happened to walk by wearing a Spider-Man shirt. And I was like, "I like Spider-Man. Who are you?" Like, I'm in the neighborhood.
yeah,
So I don't know. For me, sometimes wearing like shirts or things that you like can like get people's attention,
right,
and they can be like, "Oh, I like that too." And it can start a conversation, or like sometimes if I'm feeling lonely, I'll go to like Facebook events in my area and just kind of like force myself to interact with people a little bit if I'm not 100% feeling it, or I don't know, just like try to go out there in little ways or like consistently be at places. Like I used to live in a place with a hot tub, so I would have all kinds of cool conversations around the hot tub with people that would be there too.
yeah,
Just try to find like those community meeting places, I guess, or there's even like Facebook groups for finding friends. Like a couple months ago, my therapist was like, "Hey, you need more friends." So I was like, "Okay." So I posted on a couple groups just explaining who I was and gave like a recent picture, and now I have a couple new friends that I met through there. So it's cool how you can just meet people just in the most random ways and you never see it coming. So like,
Yeah.
don't give up hope if you think you're forever lonely or something, because I've met people through the most random ways ever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's part of like the great thing about hosting the show is like I have so many new friends who our shared experience is the homeschool thing. And it's not
Yeah.
always the only thing. Like, you're talking about Spider-Man. I'm like, okay, yeah, no, we can have a conversation about Spider-Man now,
Yes.
and comic books and stuff like that. But it is like this great, like you were saying, finding those things that are like the common thread, right? And
Mhm.
seeing if it can be built off of that is like such a great way. And I love what you were saying too about like actually going and being in person at something.
Mhm.
Virtual can be great.
Mhm.
You and I would never have met if it wasn't for the internet. But like,
Yeah, for real.
but it is like it's also limiting to some degree, right? And
Mhm.
so yeah, I think that's really a great like tip or suggestion is just like go out, just like be okay being yourself, and then like you know see what happens, talk to people.
Yeah, just be open to talking to people, because sometimes I feel like a stranger can come up to you to ask you something, your initial reaction is like, "Ugh, what are you doing? Like, I
Yeah,
don't know you." But it's like, what if they're a cool person though? You don't know.
yeah, you don't
Like,
know, you don't
yeah,
know till you know.
I yeah. Well, I'd love to be a new virtual friend of yours if there's any openings available.
Of
But
course, of course, you're on the show. That Yeah, you're already in.
yay, yay! Glad to join the club.
Something else that I found out right before we started recording too is that you also have written some books, and
Yes.
so let's talk about that a little bit, and let's talk about like that kind of like that's a creative outlet, and so what like inspired that? Tell us a little bit about like what they are. Are they books of poetry? Are they novels? What are we looking at?
Yeah, it's just some short books of poetry. I self-published them as ebooks on Amazon, and they're just some of my experiences, like growing up with the type of parents I had, like surviving emotional abuse, and then I also did like a series of poems about previous relationships I've had. I believe that one is called Funeral of My Fantasies. And it's just kind of like learning how to move past the person you thought you were with and then realizing the reality of what was actually happening. And they all kind of have different themes, like depending on who I'm writing about.
Hmm.
So I might add some new stuff in the near future, but yeah, I've been writing since I was 9. It's like a passion of mine. So when I found out I could like self-publish and didn't have to like send it out to a million publishing houses, I was like, this is really cool that Amazon lets you do that. So it's like a Kindle ebook that you can get.
Well, yeah, the reason I wanted to bring it up too is because like, each of us we have our passions, right? We have our things that it's
Mm-hmm.
like, our thing. And so like you were saying, like you started writing at 9 years old, and like obviously you've been doing that for a while now. So like what like do you know where that love comes from of like wanting to write, and like and then why poetry? Like what got you into that? Because like I've written some poetry. It's not very good.
Oh, cool.
Um nothing publishable by any stretch of the imagination, but I took some creative writing classes, and like they're like you got to write poetry, and mine is like the cat sat, it's like kind of a thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm like,
yeah.
if you just read it right, it sounds like slam poetry, but no, there is a real art to poetry. So I'm curious, like what got you into writing, and then what got you into like poetry in general.
Well, I think around that time of my life, I was really into reading. Part of it was because I couldn't really go anywhere on the regular. So it's like, well, I can escape mentally, if not physically. So I was reading all kinds of things. So that got me into writing stories in general, or like, you know, Homegirl really thought she was going to be like the next C.S. Lewis or Tolkien because I grew up on those books. So I was like, oh, yeah, that's so easy. Of course I can do that, right? And yeah, a lot of stuff I wrote was very cringe. What got me into poetry in general was one of my dual enrollment classes. Shout out Miss Rachel. She was great. And that, like, literally at 17, I still thought, oh, poems have to rhyme. They just have to, right? Because then it's not a poem. And then she, like, really challenged that perception and like introduced me to a lot of poetry throughout the eras that was like didn't rhyme but had like really deep like emotional meaning and metaphors and stuff. And it really changed how I thought about poetry. And I was like, wow, this is a really amazing way to just like explore things and make people feel what you're feeling. Like you can sometimes do that through like a story, but I feel like poetry is even better at that. Just like pulling the reader into like this is what's going on. Like my heart is bleeding on the floor right now. I'm making you see it, kind of thing. So I really like that about poetry in particular.
I'm not going to say that this is my original analogy for what you're describing, but like I think of like books and novels as very much like a house tour. They take you through every
Yes.
crook and,
Mm-hmm.
cranny of the house. Sometimes not every room, but they show you, you get to see the whole thing to some degree. Poetry to me is like the blinds are open and you can see into the house, but you can't see everything. And so it's like a very, like you were saying, it's like a moment in time of like an
Yeah.
experience. And that's what people can pull off of it, right? And that's, we attach our
Mm-hmm.
own stories, our own whatever to that piece of, we see ourselves in it a lot of times. And so I
Yeah.
think, it's very similar to like songwriting is like, we attach
Mm-hmm.
our own deeper meanings to things that sometimes are not that deep, sometimes are very deep, but like we just have a different interpretation of it. And I think that that's like, again, it's like a very beautiful thing that it's like nothing can ever replace human made art in general because it is like it's the human experience.
Yeah, I love how it kind of forces you to boil it down to like universal themes that everybody can get into for sure.
Are you still writing? Like, is that something that is a daily, weekly thing for you, or how do you still stretch that creative muscle at all?
I think there's periods where I write a lot and there's periods where I don't. I'm going through a breakup right now, so I feel more inspired than I have in a while. I don't know if that sounds bad, but I think that might have been a sign that it was a toxic relationship because I wasn't feeling inspired near the end. I was just kind of like, I felt like I was on snooze mode through my life. And now it's like I'm kind of forced to wake up and figure out all this stuff at the same time. So I did write a little something I posted on my Facebook because I basically was forced to learn stick shift in like 2 days and go get it to the dealership to trade it in. And I'm really bad at stick shift. So I called it Subi's last ride because it was a Subaru. And
Nice.
I swear that 20-minute drive to the dealership felt like I was going to Mount Doom, man. It's so bad. I was just like, I have to make it. This is my only shot. I have to get there. So I felt like that was worth commemorating in a little piece I put on my Facebook and stuff like that. So I'm kind of like trying to explore it. Some of it might be cringe, but I'm just like, you know what? This is just how I express myself right now. Like,
Yeah.
just lots of emotions and feelings all at the same time. So I'm getting back into it.
That's the beautiful thing about like poetry and songwriting is like it doesn't have to be deep. It can
Mm-hmm.
be, but it doesn't have to be. It also can be silly. It can be funny. It can be,
Mm-hmm.
it can be all these different things. And so like, a funny story of you like killing it multiple times trying to get your car while you're like, I have no clue what I'm doing. Like, trying to watch a YouTube video and figure out like I got to push this pedal and do this all at the same time. Like, yeah, I don't blame you. I'm terrible at driving stick as well. But yeah, I think that's like again, that's like the beautiful thing about like the creative process and like 2026 has been a year for me where I've started writing and journaling a lot more
Oh,
and
good deal.
I've always kind of done it in the background, but it's always been like I'll type it out kind of a thing. And this is the first year I bought myself like an actual like journal and I write in it
Yeah, I just did too.
consistently. And I think there's something really like magical about like getting like you were saying those emotions out in a way that's like, cuz it sucks when they're just all bottled up inside. It's like it's much
Mm-hmm.
better to like put them out in some form of energy and at different times in your life it comes in different ways, right? For me right now it's journaling, sometimes it's poetry, for some people it's
Mm-hmm.
going to the gym, it's like whatever, you got to get that stuff out. um and so very cool. I'm very excited. I'm gonna make sure to put a link to all of your poetry books down in the description as well. So
Thank
go
you.
go check them out. And if poetry is something you're into, here we go. New poetry books for you guys to explore.
Thank you.
Hey, support a
Yes, I'm
fellow
looking
homeschool
into it.
alum.
Yes.
Cool. So one final thing I wanted to kind of touch on with you, and something that has come up on this show a lot recently, has been adult diagnosis of ADHD. And so,
Hmm.
when you and I chatted previously, you were telling me about that and things like that. So I want to know quickly, kind of like what it doesn't have to be quick. Uh but like I'm curious what got you to the point of wanting to get diagnosed and then what that has like meant to you, and then we'll talk about how things have maybe shifted in your life since that. So,
Yeah. Well, when I was younger, my mom took me to, I'm pretty sure, a not qualified person and got me diagnosed with Asperger's autism and told everyone in the Christmas letter that I had that. I did learn as an adult that those symptoms can like overlap with ADHD, so I think I got
yeah.
misdiagnosed. So I kind of wish that I'd been diagnosed earlier. I definitely was very distracted mentally. Like you would never know it, but I was just like picturing like my favorite movies in my head instead of listening to my math teacher, you know? So I think that would have helped a lot if I got diagnosed earlier. So I was working at a job that required a lot of attention to detail. And honestly, in hindsight, my boss was just not being a nice person. We'll just put it that way. But she made me feel like something was wrong with me that I couldn't like intensely focus for long periods of time. And then my other coworker was like, "Oh, I think you have ADHD." So I went to my primary care provider, and they basically confirmed that I did. So with that particular job, I was glad for the diagnosis. They got me meds and stuff like that. I have a different job that's not as mentally taxing, so it doesn't affect me too much anymore. But it did feel good to have some like answers to what I was like as a kid, like why was I so weird and things like that, and why wasn't I doing better in school? I did pretty decently, but like I feel like I could have gone better if I was decently diagnosed earlier on and stuff like that. So it helps because then if in the future someone's like, "Hey, do this very focused task," I can be like, "Okay, this is what I need to do to make sure I can do that," kind of thing.
That's a big thing that I think a lot of people who are diagnosed, yeah, in their 20s and later in life. I had somebody on recently who he's like late 30s, early 40s, something like that, and he was diagnosed in the last year as that. And
Oh
and
man.
so, yeah, one of the things that I've learned as someone who grew up with, I don't have ADHD, but I have people in my life who do, and like it's all about like the coping mechanisms is ultimately like, and some of them are healthy and some of them are not, right? You figure out the things that work for you, like you were describing of like, if I have to do a very detail oriented task, there's probably a checklist of things that you have to do before you can really like hone in, or it's going to take me longer than someone else doing it, or whatever those things are. But I'm curious, like you talked about you know with that diagnosis, then like being able to look back at your childhood and say, well, this maybe would have been helpful here and here and here. But what are the things that I guess you've kind of learned about yourself, and maybe like, I don't want to say they're tricks, but maybe those coping mechanisms where you're like, okay, now like because I understand my brain, it's given me more self-esteem, confidence in like knowing like this is how I operate as a person.
Yeah, it definitely helped out right away because for like a split second, I was like, "Oh, should I feel bad about this? Because I technically have a disability or whatever." And my best friends were all like, "No, we all have it too. It's whatever. Like, it's not a big deal." And I realized it is a very common thing. And some people think that it actually helps like earlier ancestors of humanity because we had to focus on a bunch of stuff at the same time. We weren't stuck in boxes for 8 hours a day staring at a screen. So I was like, okay, this actually can be a helpful thing to have. And yeah, definitely looking back, I'm like, okay, I wasn't stupid for like mentally dozing off and thinking about something else. That's just how my brain is wired. I wasn't ready to sit down and shut up for 8 hours every single day. So it definitely made me feel a little better about myself. Like, okay, I'm just a little bit different than I thought I was, or that I was supposed to be, or whatever.
Yeah. So like, as far as like, I guess finding new ways to deal with the way that your brain operates and like those coping mechanisms, like what have you found any new things that have helped you significantly, or you know, or or is it just kind of knowing, hey, this is the way I am now, like not now, but like this is the way I am, uh, like has just helped you?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of simple things. It's nothing crazy. Like, my phone calendar saves my life. There have definitely been times where I was supposed to call someone and I totally forgot till I got the 10-minute reminder. I was like, oh, yeah, thank you. I would have totally spaced on that. or I got prescribed like a low dosage of Adderall if I really need it, or even caffeine can help your brain focus more. It's kind of a similar effect. So I can do things like that when I really need it. Just taking like basic notes if I'm like really worried my brain's gonna like skip along and forget about something. I'm just like, all right, I know I'm gonna forget this. So give me 2 seconds. Let me write this down, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, emailing myself things or just putting in a lot of detail on my calendar, like, okay, this is who I'm meeting, this is where I'm going, because I know I'm going to forget this 10 minutes after someone tells me. So it
Yeah.
really helps.
I think what's interesting too about like ADHD is like it manifests itself in so many different ways. For some people
Mm-hmm.
it's like the object permanence thing of like you put something somewhere and then it's out of sight, out of mind. You're like it doesn't exist
Mm-hmm.
anymore. And then like to your point about like making plans with people, you're like I got to write it down. I got to put it in a calendar. I have to have this
Mm-hmm.
system to know like and the reminders of like hey, in 24 hours this thing is happening or in an hour this thing is happening. In 10 minutes this
Mm-hmm.
thing is happening, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I think to some degree everybody kind of has that like we probably should be writing a lot of these things down. Um
Mm-hmm.
but it is cool to see like how people build the systems to like be able to do that. Like you were saying with the calendar, or like I know people with object permanence who are like, yeah, I just don't use certain parts of my fridge because if I put things there, that's where they go to die, basically. Um,
Okay.
and um, so it is cool to see like people, especially like, you know, now in adulthood, like be like, okay, I'm gonna get diagnosed. I'm gonna like figure out what is going on in my brain. And like I think it's this step that a lot of us are taking, our generation is taking towards like being healthier people, which is gonna like
Mm-hmm.
radicalize the world here very soon because like,
For sure.
you know, pretty soon we're gonna be the majority is gonna be us 20, 30-year olds. And so like I think some cool shifts are coming where it's like we actually like care about ourselves and we've nurtured ourselves and we know how our brains operate and we're working on healing our inner child in so many ways and things like that. And so I think some big shifts are coming.
Yeah, and of course, I encourage everyone to at least try therapy. And I know that it's usually expensive, but I did recently realize that there's these things called employee assistance programs where a lot of jobs will let you have X amount of sessions for free. So I highly encourage people to try that if you're like, oh, I'm so weird. Why am I such a failure at this thing in my life? It's just like you're probably not. It's just you need someone to help you like give you a different perspective on it or figure out a way to move through it.
Yeah.
Things. So
Yeah.
that definitely helps as well.
Yeah. Well, and you're talking about, I mean, therapists are, that's their job. Their job is to know the tools,
Mm-hmm.
and so, and to be able to diagnose people to some degree with stuff. And so yeah, it is super helpful. I did therapy a little bit in college and, some one-offs type of thing and every now and then and stuff. And it's like, it's helpful to have that other person look in and be able to ask the
Mm-hmm.
questions that you sometimes can't ask yourself. And so you can work on stuff and make yourself better because ultimately that's kind of what hopefully it's all about is getting progressively a little bit better every single day. So
Yeah, exactly. It's just like you think things are normal in your life, and then they're like, "You said what?" Like, and then you're like, "Oh, that's not normal. Oops. Okay."
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't know till you know. So
Mm-hmm.
Liliana, this has been a wonderful conversation. I appreciate you coming on and talking about not only your homeschool experience but like life in general, launching. We talked about poetry. We went a lot of different places, and it was a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
I love it.
Good.
We just needed some popcorn. I live in the perfect friend hangout. Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to talk to you.
Of course, of course. And to the audience, again, if you're interested in some poetry books, link down below. Go check it out and support a fellow homeschool alum. If you want to support the show, you know what to do. Do all the internet things. Like this video, like this audio episode, however you consume it. Share it with a friend. Leave a comment. Like, trust me, it actually like does do something when you do those things. And so I appreciate it when you do that. If you want to be on the show, shoot me an email, exhsclub@gmail.com. Tell me a little bit about your homeschool experience. We'll set up a time to chat, and maybe you'll be on the show very, very soon. And so,
It's
again,
really nice, I promise.
yeah, I don't bite. Um, I don't bite. And so, yeah, so let's be homeschool friends. That's I guess what I'm asking
Yes.
there.
Woo!
Very cool. Well, until next time, you guys, we'll see ya. Peace.